Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our monthly cooking segment of our worship. I am assisted here by Maggie this morning, and we are making hot crossed buns, which is a wonderful traditional treat, often eaten at Eastertide in the 21st century, but was actually eaten as a special Good Friday treat in Europe for many, many centuries before that. There is some evidence that putting crosses on cakes actually may go all the way back to the Greek church, perhaps as far back as the 4th century. So the British version of it was a spiced crossed bun that was really not terribly sweet. What you see in the store these days is often, covered in frosting and everything, but frosting was not an original part of this treat, and originally the crosses were made directly on the buns and in the buns. So by the time it was finished, you would have a very clear cross on your bun. So let's get to it. We are going to start with 500 grams of flour, which is about 3 cups and 2 tablespoons full. I'm following European recipes, so everything's metric, but that can be pretty easily converted these days. We will add in 10 grams of kosher salt. And Maggie, if you could add in our instant yeast we'll use today. As I've showed you several other times, I often like to use just regular yeast, but for this recipe I think instant really does work better. And we will be adding in 75 grams of sugar, which is about 1/3 of a cup. And we will be adding some melted or at least soft butter. And this is a couple of tablespoons full. And we have a couple of cracked eggs, if you put that in, Maggie. All right, so we can mix all of this up into a dough that we will then knead for 5 minutes. This does make a fairly sticky dough, so for you bread makers out there, you might find it somewhat annoying. But it's not too bad. You just have to be a little patient with it. We'll add in 120 milliliters of warm milk, or that's about half a cup.
Well, I think the annoying dough is worth it to try the hot cross buns.
Yes, absolutely. You like hot cross buns?
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of it, Maggie?
Eating it.
Eating it, okay. What flavor in it do you like the best?
I'm not sure, I just eat it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you do.
I kind of like the raisins.
The raisins in it. And lastly, 1/4 to 1/2 cup of water. I usually start on the lighter end. This can, for you bread makers out there, you're familiar with this. Even the atmospheric conditions sometimes can play a role as to how much water you really need to add, but you want to add enough certainly to be able to pick up all of the flour within the bowl. So hot cross buns, though they are quite a beloved treat, were actually outlawed for all days except Christmas and Good Friday and New Year's in Britain for quite a long time. The Puritans didn't like hot cross buns. They tended to be a little hard on the cultural connections that we have with holidays. Sometimes they made good points. This time it's like, it's a bun. It's really not a big deal. It's okay. But it was actually controversial, if you can believe that, for quite a long time. But even during the Puritan days, they found great difficulty in getting rid of the hot cross bun because it was indeed so popular.
And so yummy.
And certainly it was good. All right. So once you have everything all mixed up, then you can knead it for about 5 minutes. Once the dough is properly kneaded, then you're going to have to let it rise for about an hour. And after that is when you can add in your raisins and apple mixture and peel, if you'd like to add that, and the orange zest, and then let it sit for another hour before you get that wonderful mixture that you can cut up into the buns. So after kneading it for about 5 minutes, you should end up with a nice smooth dough like this, with the skin that you would expect for you bread bakers out there. And then you just pop it into an oiled bowl and throw a tea towel over it, and it can sit for the next hour and then we'll be ready to add our fruit. All right, so we have let our dough rise for an hour. So it is puffed up a little bit, but we are going to now put in our apple and our orange zest and our raisins. So we have about a cup of raisins. Most recipes call for about 125 grams of raisins, which is a scant cup. If you're a big fan of raisins, you may want to use a little bit more than that. 125 grams is plenty for me. Most European recipes these days do call for an apple, and you can just cut up an apple and have it cook within the roll. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's just not American enough for me. I think Americans like their apple cooked a little bit with some a little bit of sugar and some cinnamon, of course. So that's the way I do it. I put it, chop up the apple with just a little bit of butter, not much, just a little, and then 2 teaspoons of sugar and 2 teaspoons of cinnamon to cook it down. You don't want it mushy. It shouldn't be that apple pie consistency. It is going to be baked a little longer, but it is nice to cook it down a little bit. So it does make it slightly messier, but I think it's awfully good. Okay, so we also use 2 entire oranges. Regular size oranges will work here. Those enormous navel oranges that you can see in the grocery store sometimes are probably a little too big. You might only need maybe 1.5 or maybe just 1 1/4 of those kind. But a regular size orange, 2 will do. If you have little clementines, maybe use 3 or 4. This gives the dough not only a brilliant orangey flavor, but also makes them smell wonderful. And that is part of the idea. So the cross is certainly meant to signify Jesus' dying on the cross. The smells are meant, from all of the spices from it, are meant to remind us of the burial spices and perhaps with a hint towards the resurrection too, as hot cross buns these days, you know, tend to get eaten on Easter. So you just continue to knead in all of this in your dough until you have a nice, very full dough with lots of orange that you can see here, and cinnamon. It smells magnificent. So we're going to let that sit again for another hour before we roll it out and make our buns. All right, welcome back. So we have let our hot cross buns get a good second rise. Now we are going to punch it down, get some of that air out. And then we are going to cut it up into our individual rolls. So I think with a recipe of this size, we should be able to get 12 hot cross buns. So I usually do that by rolling it out a little, cutting it in half, and then cutting it in half again. And then with what you have left, you cut it into thirds. And that should give you 12 good-sized hot cross buns. With your roll, what you have left, you can put it into a baking dish. And when you have all of these laid out, then you will let it sit for another hour to let it rise, and then we will do some piping. Welcome back. So we have now let our hot cross buns rise for another hour in our proving bag here, a little plastic bag. Now we have our piping bag out. This is just a mixture of flour and water. It was also traditional to use some short crust. If you really like lard, that may work. But we're just going with some flour and water to put our crosses right on top of all of our buns. So Maggie, you want to take it away? A wonderful little cross.
I don't have a lot of practice with piping bags.
No, that's okay. Piping bags
are tricky.
Yeah, they can be a little tricky, but that's okay. I think we have a couple of lovely little crosses here. So, thank you very much. All right, we have all 12 nicely piped crosses here, and then Maggie's going to put it into the oven. The oven is preheated at 425. You can put them in 20 minutes, should do. Go ahead.
Hot cross buns, 1 a penny, 2 a penny, hot cross buns.
So we pulled it out of the oven, and everything is looking really yummy and all set here. So we're going to let that cool for a bit. Then we'll pop it out of the pan, and then use a apricot glaze to finish them off. Some people like a little extra frosting on it. Whatever you'd like to do is fine. It's Eastertide. If you want to go a little extravagant on the sugar, I think that'd be fine. But the apricot glaze, I think, is pretty yummy. So we'll do that next. So we have now pulled our hot cross buns out of the oven, and the last step is to do an apricot glaze if you'd like, or perhaps you'd like to ice it in a different way. I used an apricot glaze, which was simply just taking a little apricot jam, mixing it with just a splash of water, and then running it through a sieve and painting it on here so you get a nice glaze. Makes it shiny and attractive, gives it a little bit of an apricot taste to it, which is enjoyable. You like it, Maggie?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for joining us again for this cooking segment. Hot cross buns are a lot of fun to make and even more fun to eat. Bon appetit.